Okay, this is part 4 of the book, Poor Man's Way to Fight Cancer, also subtitled The Cancer Picture Book. Okay, so here the question comes up, why is it so hard to learn nutrition? It's actually pretty simple. I mean, in terms of all you need to know is eat starches, fruits, and veggies. Okay, we'll talk about what to do about EPO. That's a new subject. We'll talk about that later. But in general, that's all you need to know. Those are the only 3 foods I eat, plus, I have to take a vitamin B12 supplement. That's the only supplement I personally take. Okay, the hard part is on learning all the stuff you've heard in the past. And the most common obstacle people have is getting over the Mediterranean diet. I call the Mediterranean diet the Antichrist of diet because it promises salvation, but it does not deliver. It makes people fat and sick. And it's the one recommended by almost all the universities, including the Ivy League schools, some variation of it. And it makes people sick, and then they just go, oh, well, it didn't work. I'll try, the drug or the surgery or whatever. Fruits and vegetables are alkaline. That's what's good. That helps prevent the acidic tumor microenvironment. Caffeine is stupid because it just increases the same stress hormones that increase the risk of cancer because cortisol suppressing the immune system, catecholamines potentially being siderophores, for example. Stress also activates platelets, and that makes them more able to hide metastasizing cancer cells. And by the way, what about all the credentials of all these? Most of the nutrition experts on the internet are just BS artists, as you can see for yourself. Just look at what they recommend. It's obvious, okay? And there's a lot of ones that even have good reputations, but they're still BS artists. You see them. They're recommending soy. They're recommending high-fat diets. They're recommending omega-3s, caffeine, MSG. That's all BS, okay? You can figure, and olive oil. Just look it up for yourself. Spend a little time reading on it, and you'll see that that is the case. And there's a lot of other ones that are professionals and they've got a business, so they want to keep a low profile. They don't want to offend anybody. It's bad for business to offend people. I'm not a business. I'm just a hobby, and I'll tell you, fluoride in your water is a poison, okay? And no one gives a rat's ass about you because if they did, they wouldn't poison your water, okay? A lot of people think, such and such a town is a good town with good city water. Yeah, they're poisoning your water with fluoride, okay? They hate your guts, okay? So don't be stupid. All right, if you love somebody, you wouldn't do that to them. Okay, let's see. All right, ready for the next page here. Here is the Spartan vegan pyramid of my Spartan vegan diet. Real simple. Eat your starches, your fruits, your veggies. Take a B12. Have good relationships. At least one positive friendship in your life. Nice to have at least one intellectual friend, somebody you can have an intelligent conversation with. Get your exercise, aerobic and strength exercise. Get your sunshine for all the benefits. Get your sleep, and your religion will make you healthier too, and have a sense of purpose in your life. Quite often, I think helping other people makes us healthier ourselves because, in a sense, it sends reward transmitters to our brain. And I believe that we almost like tell our own self. Our body tells its own self. If you're helping other members of your group, because humans traditionally lived in extended family groups, then your life is more valuable in some way, and it's more worthwhile for you to keep living. I think we somehow had a sense of that. Seems to be the case. Your relationship with God, that also helps you. Okay, and then this is just a simplified way of looking at nutrition. I call this the tree of good and evil. The good food's on this side, choose stuff from over there. The bad's over here, and choose only and avoid all that stuff. And so keep it simple. Only do things that are good for you. Don't do anything that's bad for you. Okay, let's see what else is in here. And the Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden. Genesis 1:29 is where he says he had us to eat a vegan diet. And basically, we were supposed to eat the vegan diet based on the Bible. It's Genesis 1:29. He said, Then God said, Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree which has fruit, it shall be food for you. And to every beast of the earth, and every bird of the air, and every creature that crawls upon the earth, I have given every plant for food. So according to this, all animals were supposed to be vegetarians. After the flood, though, the flood wiped out the plants, so people had to eat some animal products. They were supposed to go back to eating vegetarian, but they didn't do it for multiple reasons. Okay, and here's another one, Exodus 15:26. So chapter 15, verse 26. And God said, If thou wilt hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God, and will give ear to his commandments, I will put none of these diseases upon thee, which I have brought upon the Egyptians, which in our modern context means low-carb paleos. For I am the Lord God who heals you. Okay, I'm just going to show you a little bit of epidemiology stuff. So this is northern Mexico. These are the Copper Canyon, Sierra Madre Mountains, and this is where the Tarahumara live. And then here's the Pima Indians. They used to be combined with the Tarahumara population, but after the Mexican-American War in 1848, they were pulled into Arizona. And the bottom line is the Tarahumara eat their old-fashioned corn and beans and local greens and squash. They're super fit. They can run 100 miles in 2 days. The Pima have eaten the standard American diet, the SAD diet, and they have a tendency, tremendous obesity. They're fat, they're sick. They get all the diseases the Westerners get. They get all the surgeries. Open heart surgery called the cabbage, coronary artery bypass graft, gallstones, mostly cholesterol stones, 95% or more. Abdominal pressure syndrome with appendicitis, they get their appendix taken out. Diverticulitis, they get their sigmoid taken out. They end up being diabetic, a lot of them, and they end up getting all the stuff diabetics get. Lots of amputations. They go blind. They go into kidney failure. They die early from a heart attack. It's a mess. By the way, every doctor in an American hospital deals with this all day long. Most of the patients have these diseases. It's not like some of them do. Most of them do. I can tell you, I look at demented brains all the time, and I will tell you 95% of them more, they're diabetic and they're hypertensive. Okay, and then they also, almost all of them have poor dentition and at least one cataract surgery. Okay, so TBE, total body energy, you know, why wouldn't you want to be like the Tarahumara, full of energy, you know? Nathan Pritikin patterned his diet after them. He's like, crap, these guys are running 100 miles in 2 days. They're incredibly fit. Oh, when you study fat, you'll come to the same conclusion Nathan Pritikin did. If you really study it, not like a BS artist, but truthfully trying to understand it, he said fat is bad. Okay, it's all bad. You get good fat from the fiber. All right. Anyways, atherosclerotic plaque. I got all lectures on that on my YouTube channel about all this stuff. Atherosclerotic plaque, basically, part of it is reabsorbable. You can reabsorb the acute clot component of it with the red blood cells. You can absorb the lipid core, the little fatty vesicles. You can absorb the necrotic core of dead tissue here. You're not going to reabsorb the calcification. As far as the fibrous tissue or scar tissue, if you catch it early while it's still cellular, you might reabsorb part of that. Later on, when it's acellular, just collagen, you're not going to reabsorb that. But the good news is, you know, the amount of blood flow is over R to the fourth. So a small decrease in size of the plaque can lead to a big increase in flow. Plus, the endothelial cells start to produce nitric oxide again when you give them a healthy diet. You know, you avoid the sodium, which inhibits them. You avoid the saturated fat, which inhibits them. You avoid the hypertension, which damages them. All these things will cause good vasodilation in your arterioles and whatnot, and that will increase the amount of blood flow. And so the arterial system sort of comes back to life. Instead of being an atherosclerotic pipe that's fixed and not very compliant or dynamic, it becomes more dynamic, able to vasodilate in response to increased energy demand of the local tissue. So that's a good thing. Okay, and here's a little bit of a joke. Basically, a lot of people have seen their Johnson come back to life after they go vegan on a low-fat vegan diet. It doesn't always do that, but quite often it does. It'll often work better than it did before. So I joke, it's kind of like the Bible story when Jesus revived Lazarus. Okay, here's the stages of diabetes. Diabetes is super, super, super common. It's so common, I expect every patient over 60 to have diabetes. I expect them to have it. They don't all have it, but most of them do, or they've got advanced pre-diabetes, or they'll have complications of diabetes even though they're not officially diagnosed with it yet. Again, I see this all day long, every day. Fat starts to accumulate in the skeletal muscles, and that causes insulin resistance in the skeletal muscles. Fat then accumulates in the liver, and that'll cause insulin resistance in the liver. So this will cause fasting. This will cause hyperglycemia immediately after a meal. So a meal is called prandial. So it'll be post-prandial hyperglycemia. Fat accumulation in the liver leads to abnormal elevated blood glucose levels, even when you're not, even when you're fasting. So that's fasting hyperglycemia. Okay, eventually you start accumulating fat in the pancreas. And in the pancreas, it's thought to cause damage to the beta cells. Those are the ones that make insulin. And then the pancreas fails. And I can tell you, I look at CAT scans, a lot of abdominal CAT scans, and I'll see diabetic patient, it'll have fatty atrophy of their pancreas. Okay, then you start getting all the diabetic complications, going blind, diabetic retinopathy, coronary artery disease, atherosclerosis, and they're dying of heart attacks like crazy. It's a very common reason for them to die. Kidney failure, they're impotent, they get a lot of amputations of their foot. It's a terrible disease. Okay, here's, when you draw blood on a person, normal blood is relatively translucent plasma. So here's the red blood cell sediment down to the bottom after this has been put through a centrifuge. In the middle is the white blood cells called the buffy coat. And then above it is the plasma, the more liquid, more like bulk water, if you will. If you eat a high-fat meal, this becomes opaque, hard to see through because the fat just accumulates in there. Normally in the flowing blood, it's even worse than that. It sticks the red blood cells together. In that movie Game Changers, they had a nice picture of one of these. You can just type this into your internet browser and find a picture of it. What does blood look like in a test tube? And as the red blood cells are all stuck together, they decrease oxygen delivery to the tissues about 15 to 20%. And they knew that that was the case with saturated fat, peaking at about 5 hours, so getting significant about 3 hours, peaking at 5 hours, and still being kind of bad at around 7 to 8 hours. And they did this, Peter quoted this back in the 1950s. He's a cardiologist out of Pennsylvania. And he would check the patient's lipid levels in their blood every 30 minutes. And these were patients who were cardiac angina patients. So they had known coronary artery disease. And what was crazy about it, you couldn't even do this nowadays. It wouldn't get approved by the Institutional Review Board, the IRB. Okay, but he was allowed to do it. And they would have chest pain episodes, coordinating with when their lipids were peak in their blood, okay, consistent with blood sludge or rouleau formation due to the elevated chylomicrons, due to the elevated LDL cholesterol and being a bridging molecule sticking the RBCs together, causing rouleau formation, stack of coins. That's the word for that in French. And anyways, Ansel Keys also wrote all about sat fat being so bad in the 1950s. And what did this all lead to? It led to a craze in the 1960s. Well, we're going to reduce sat fat and we're going to increase omega-6 fat and all these cooking oils instead of the sat fat. And when they did that, they tested this out. Later on, Ray Rosenman and Meyer Friedman sort of took over the experiments of what Peter Quo had done in the 1950s, and they gave the patients unsaturated fat, like these omega-6 cooking oils. And here's what was funny about that: they were expecting an improvement. No, it was worse. They would give it to them at like about 8 o'clock in the morning, and they would still have very high fat levels in their blood 9, even 10 hours later. And his workers were pissed off. They're like, "Hey, we want to go home." All right. So they still got their anginal episodes at peak lipidemia. All right. So the bottom line is fat's bad. You're screwed either way. Okay. And then people say, "Oh, well, that's just omega-6 fats, and that's just sat fat. What about olive oil? Olive oil's got a lot of MUFA, monounsaturated fatty acid. Yeah, it does, but it also has a lot of sat fat. Let's say in the ballpark of 14%. It also has a lot of omega-6 fats, and the MUFAs themselves are no angels. Okay. It's liquid fat. There's nothing good about liquid fat. Omega-3s are immunosuppressant, increase the risk of metastatic disease in animals, thought to increase the risk of prostate cancer in humans, increase obesity, increase insulin resistance over time. Obesity causes all kinds of other problems. Not a good idea. Okay. A lot of people have CPAP for obstructive sleep apnea, fat people especially. People with fatty livers and whatnot, and they're also going to have hypooxygenation of their tissues, potentially making their tumor milieu regions hypoxic. Not good. Get your act together. Try to avoid that. Okay, this is just showing what the stuck together red blood cells look like. Typical red blood cells about 7 microns in diameter. Typical capillary is about 5 microns in diameter. Because the RBC is bigger, it has to deform itself a little bit to pass through the capillary. But when you've got high LDL cholesterol from eating high-fat meals or eating a lot of animal protein, that also causes elevated cholesterol. That's an important point. Animal protein causes elevated blood cholesterol. And I think it's because it induces a metabolic, anabolic state. So that causes like more building, more Hayflick limit reached faster, more mTOR activation. Yeah, that's an important point. This sort of goes back to the research of T. Colin Campbell in his book, The China Study. Okay, so anyways, both of those things are going to lead to more bridging molecules, more sticking together red blood cells. Elevated uric acid, like let's say from drinking lots of fructose will do it. Eating lots of meat does that too, but eating high fructose corn syrup will do that as well. Excessive psychological stress will increase fibrinogen in the blood. Fibrinogen in the blood is also a bridging molecule, causes sticking of the RBCs. And when they're stuck together, it's harder for them to deform and pass through the capillary. What does that mean? Blood pressure has to go up to pump them through the system, and especially to get blood to the top of the brain. Okay. And then I'm also going to tell you, atherosclerosis is a blood clot. You need to know that. If you're going to make sense of atherosclerosis, that's what you need to do. I studied atherosclerosis. I did a fellowship at Harvard in the 1990s in vascular interventional radiology was the main thing I did. And I've been studying atherosclerosis in some detail since that time. And I can tell you, you need to know this. If you're going to make any sense out of atherosclerosis, you need to know that it's a blood clot. And it sort of organizes over time. And I can tell you this. Most of your cardiologists won't know that. Most of your vascular surgeons won't know that. Most of your cardiothoracic surgeons won't know that. Most of your interventional radiologists, they don't know this. This is not in the medical books. This is not in the textbooks. But once you study it and you start reading the research paper, it's obvious that this is what it is. And the person who did the best job of figuring this out were the pathologists. And the reason is the pathologist looks at the atherosclerotic plaque in a microscope and they go, hey, it's the same thing as a blood clot. It's the same thing as a hematoma. Okay? Versus the other guys, like let's say the cardiologists who do research on it, they just do blood tests. Okay? They might do a cardiac cath where they can't actually see the internal contents of the plaque. Okay? So they're going to say, oh, cholesterol, oh, inflammation. No, the pathologist looking at a microscope says, I don't see that much inflammation here. You need to know that. I look at CT scans a lot of times, CTA, computerized tomography arteriograms, like CTA of the arteries of the head and the neck and the chest. And you can see what is called atherosclerotic plaque is a blood clot. Okay, that's what it is. All right, and so that's relevant because you want to know what you're talking about. And the other reason is, why do pathologists figure this out so well, and are they able to explain it? And the reason is because they don't care what the truth is. And that's an important point. You have to not care what the truth is in order to find the truth. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're a cardiologist. Do you think a cardiologist is going to publish a paper in a journal saying atherosclerosis is just a blood clot and everybody should eat a vegan diet? No way. They would kick his ass. They'd say, what are you talking about? We're making millions of dollars on stents. Why are you bad-mouthing stents, you traitor, you jerk, you scumbag? Okay, so you think a vascular surgeon's going to say that, saying, oh, these patients could go on a vegan diet instead of getting a coronary bypass graft? We get paid, we bill about $120,000 a case. They would throw his butt out. They would fire him from the hospital. He'd be toast immediately, okay? So what I'm trying to say is a pathologist doesn't care. He doesn't care if it's treated with a stent, if it's treated with heart surgery, if it's treated with diet. That's why he can talk about it, okay? And I kind of switched now. I used to do a lot of vascular interventional, but then I sort of moved towards being primarily a neuroradiologist. And, I saw my father suffer consequences of heart disease, and I didn't know back then. Again, that was many, 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 many years ago. I'll tell you the truth because I don't really care, okay? And I also know for the fact, and everybody in medicine knows this too, the number of patients who watch my videos are minuscule, insignificant, okay? There are a few smart people that are able to find me, but in the real world, the average stupid person will never, ever learn this type of information. This is way, way, way beyond. This is way beyond the average doctor. Okay, anyways, here's a normal blood pressure. Let's say something like, 110 over 70. Here's hypertension, something like 200 over 100. The difference between the number on top and the number on the bottom is called the pulse pressure. The number on top is systolic. Systole means contraction of the heart. Diastole means relaxation. So that's the bigger the pulse pressure, that's bad. Things that help to lower blood pressure include eating a diet with more plants. Plants have potassium, P for potassium, and P for plants. And that's a vasodilator, meaning it opens up arteries. Magnesium is located in the center of chlorophyll, and it's also a vasodilator. Those open up arteries, okay? The higher the LDL cholesterol, which comes from eating a high-fat diet, also from eating a high animal protein diet, the more your red blood cells stick together, the thicker your blood becomes. So blood viscosity is a measure of blood thickness. Okay, another thing to know about red blood cells. Red blood cells have what's called a zeta potential. A zeta potential is a negative charge on the outer surface of a red blood cell. Here's another red blood cell. Here's another one. And they repel each other because of these negative charges. And that's important. You don't want them sticking together under normal conditions. But these bridging molecules, things like LDL cholesterol, fibrinogen, the clotting protein, uric acid, metabolic product of high fructose corn syrup metabolism, fibrinogen from excessive psychological stress or from caffeine, which mimics psychological stress, IgM antibodies with infection and inflammation. All of these things are bridging molecules, meaning they have a positive charge and they're big enough to hold the red blood cells together. So that's called overcoming the zeta potential. All that stuff is bad. And I will tell you, I've never met a doctor in my life who even knew what a zeta potential was. This is not taught in medical school. When I was in med school, 333 students in my class, I won the award as best student in the whole class in pathology, okay? And I never heard of any of this stuff. It's not in the medical books. And that's what I meant before, that the medical books are ridiculous. They're a joke. Okay, I used to be in awe of, the Harvard authored textbook, 2,000 pages of pathology. And now that I know a lot more, I know that it's a joke. It basically doesn't teach you what causes disease. And again, I think that's so that because the doctors never learn what caused disease, they don't learn that most diseases are caused by bad diet and toxins. They never learn how to cure them, and all they know is, give a drug or do a surgery. Okay, normal blood flow is what's called laminar. You think of it being like your hand. The two in the middle is like the two long red arrows, and that's where the red blood cells are. Then the next finger is where the white blood cells are. And then where I put my thumbs, that would be like where the plasma is, adjacent to the wall of the artery. And that's how normal blood flow should be. This is called laminar blood flow. It's sort of a parabolic velocity profile of the blood vessels. And that is recognized by the arteries as good normal blood flow. When it becomes distorted, it can cause problems with the endothelial cells. Okay. And then, by the way, in case you ask yourself, why am I going through all this stuff about atherosclerosis? Because having good blood flow to oxygenate your tissues, you want to minimize atherosclerosis. The more atherosclerosis you have, the thicker your blood, the less oxygen gets to your tissue, the more you have a hypoxic tumor microenvironment, the more likely your cancer is going to grow. By improving blood flow and decreasing atherosclerosis, you'll get increased oxygen in your tissue. You'll get more oxygen, so you won't have a hypoxic tumor milieu. You'll also be able to rinse out the acidosis more effectively, and you'll have a better chance to slow down the growth of cancer. So with hypertension, high blood pressure, it hits the median divider at a bifurcation point harder than it should. So here's the external carotid artery, for example, ICA for internal carotid artery, median divider of tissue between this bifurcation. And when it hits this hard, you get retrograde flow, that's called eddy currents, and you'll also just get chaotic flow. That is sensed by the endothelium, the lining cells of this artery, as being an injury to the artery. And it'll start to shed its antithrombotic glycocalyx, its coating, and it'll then express prothrombotic molecules on its surface, like VCAM, vascular cell adhesion molecule, for example. And when it does that, it'll tend to form small clots. And then the body very quickly tries to rinse those clots away, but you've got this constant ongoing back and forth sort of battle, if you will, between producing atherosclerosis, removing it, clotting and fixing the clot, clotting and fixing the clot. And eventually the person starts losing ground and the clot gets bigger over time. So that's why you want to get your health act together before these things become irreversible, before a little piece breaks off and damages tissue in your brain, for example. Here's just a picture of the endothelium. We don't need to go into all the details, but we do need to know, these endothelial cells produce nitric oxide, NO. It goes into the arterial lumen where the blood flow is, and it helps prevent activation of the platelets. It goes retrograde into the wall of the artery to the smooth muscle cells, and it causes them to relax, to not contract, so the artery will be opened in a wider diameter. Other thing worth knowing is the endothelial glycocalyx, the heparin sulfates in there, they will bind to antithrombin 3, which also helps prevent clots. That's the things you need to know. Most important things to know about nitric oxide. It prevents platelets from clotting, and it dilates the artery. So that's a wonderful benefit it provides. Okay, here's just a picture of the endothelial cells, what they look like. They're spindle-shaped, and they're orientated along the long axis of the flow, so that as long as the flow is laminar through there, they sense that as normal flow. Everything is good, copacetic, everything is cool, all right? But if the flow becomes abnormal and starts hitting them in a weird way, they go, oh, so there's an injury here. Put the prothrombotic molecules on our surface, shed all the antithrombotic stuff. We need to form a clot and potentially stop bleeding, all right? So that's why you want normal blood flow, so you don't run into that clot formation, leading subsequently to atherosclerosis. And then what I'm also showing is hypertension increases the risk of cancer, and here's the reason why. That same process, when this blood comes under high pressure, the laminar flow is distorted into chaotic flow and retrograde eddy currents. It damages the endothelium on the far wall from the median divider, and that will start to express prothrombotic molecules. That will lead to not only damage to the glycocalyx. Damage to the glycocalyx also, what happens is, not only can clotting molecules bind to that endothelial wall, because these little proteins down below are the ones that are prothrombotic, they're also pro-adhesion. Cancer cells that are metastasizing can bind to that. So what I'm basically saying, the normal stuff sticking up high is like your endothelial glycocalyx. That's antithrombotic. That's also anti-cancer. Cancer bounces off of it. It's slippery. It's kind of like the moss growing on underneath a stream. It's slippery stuff like Jello with water on it. That's what you want. When you get the abnormal flow, the endothelial glycocalyx with the Zeta potential on it from all the sulfates, for example, and the heparin sulfate, it's shed off into the blood, and now you got these little sticky molecules sitting below, and they'll bind metastatic cells, they'll bind clotting proteins, and once this cancer cell, this is a cancer cell right here, this little purple thing with 3 extensions coming out of it, that will then be able to bind to this and somehow potentially get it into beneath the endothelium, subendothelial, and cause metastatic tumor growth. Okay, you don't want that. So the point of all this was that the same things that cause hypertension also increase the risk of metastatic cancer because they damage your arterial lining. They destroy your bodyguard, if you will, to prevent cancer cells from getting into the subendothelial space. Okay, this is just showing the importance of magnesium. Magnesium has a positive charge on it, and inside the cell, it functions to stabilize all your ATPs. So ATP is adenosine triphosphate. Tri as in 1, 2, 3 phosphate. ATP, adenosine triphosphate. These phosphates with their big negative charge, they want to bounce apart from each other. But the magnesium is like this green marker here, holding, imagine my fist is 2 phosphate. It holds them together with its 2 positive charge, prevents their negative charge from repelling each other. And you need that to make your ATPs functional. So what am I trying to say? If you don't have enough magnesium, and most people are magnesium deficient in the United States because they don't eat enough plants, your ATP system doesn't work effectively. Okay, your cells cannot do their jobs as effectively as they should. We talked about magnesium being in the center of chlorophyll. So in all your green plants and all your chlorophyll, magnesium's sitting right there in the center of it. Okay, and I said, just eat plants, you'll be eating chlorophyll. And this reminds me of a Bible quote. It says, this is 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 8. Above all, love each other deeply, for love covers over a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to each other. Use whatever gift you have received to help others. So what I'm kind of saying is, you got all these people in these blue zones from Dan Buettner's National Geographic, longest lived people in the world. And most of them are a bunch of, backward people living in, these rural areas, functional illiterates or completely illiterates. You don't need to be a genius to do this. Just eat the plants, okay? And like I'm saying, love covers a multitude of sins. If you just eat the plants, you fix all kinds of problems because that's what we're designed to eat. And that's why so many things improve, okay? That's something you need to know. The most important thing I ever learned in all my medical education was to eat starch. All right, well, anyways, I think that's enough for this chapter in this section. And in the next lecture, I'll go into this endothelial glycocalyx. It's a little bit more of a big subject. So we learned a couple of valuable things in this lecture. I hope that was helpful.